So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to introduce, first off, Jim Klimkowski. He's Principal and National Leader of Data Analytics and Great Lakes, Consulting Leader at RSM. And we also have Steve Biskey, Director, National Leader of Risk Analytics and Automation at RSM as well. Both professionals who have worked in a variety of different fields within data analytics and are going to be the experts on our panel today as we talk about the evolution in the space. Welcome, Jim and Steve.
Thanks, Max. Glad to be here.
Yep, glad to have you. How about, just to start out, we know RSM does a lot of different things from audit, tax, and consulting, but perhaps you can just explain a bit from your side about what RSM is.
Sure, absolutely. Kind of the simplest way to describe it, so most people will understand. We're the fifth biggest audit tax consulting firm in the world. We're a little different, though, than the others. We're very, very focused on being the first choice advisor to the middle market globally. So although we do a lot of upmarket work for larger companies, most of our focus are smaller businesses. So think of that $100 million to $1 billion or $1.5 billion of revenue. Our data analytics group is actually, our center of excellence for data analytics is actually spread over all three lines of our business. We do traditional business intelligence. We do advanced analytics, not just for general decision makers, but our risk group that Steve leads. We do a lot around fraud, forensic accounting, also just kind of risk mitigation for oftentimes the internal audit leader as well as chief counsel.
Right. So a lot of different areas that you're touching on with data analytics there as well. And maybe you could also share a little bit more about sort of your backgrounds and your own roles at RSM.
Sure. I'll start on that and then hand over to Jim. So my background, kind of a non-traditional way of getting into analytics. My grandfather was an IRS agent. My father was an accountant. So I kind of wanted to go into accounting. And then taking courses at Michigan State, one of my first computer science courses, I realized I just love this concept of programming and got into programming and then backed into, I hit the accounting profession at a time when the profession was starting to look at this realm of how do we audit IT systems and computers and things like that. So timing of my education just hit well. But throughout my career in both internal audit, external audit, and as a compliance professional, there's always been this theme of using data, either to better understand how a process works or to find issues. I come from a different background than Jim in that you'll hear me use the word audit a lot, which sometimes has a negative connotation, but at the end of the day, someone who's doing an audit is trying to find things that might be hidden in processes or data. So by using analytics, we can actually mine through 100% of transactions to find those anomalies and those behaviors that might be masked by other things going on in the organization. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about analytics in the risk and compliance space. Jim's got a more traditional background though. Jim, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Steve, first off, I did not know your father was an IRS agent. That explains a lot. I have had more of a traditional introduction to data analytics. So I just really started my IT career as a programmer, ultimately started to get involved in some data warehouses as early, I don't want to date myself, but as early as the mid-90s. So I've been really involved in consulting for 30 years and data analytics-oriented consulting specifically for the last 25. At RSM, our national leader for our data analytics practice. And I also have a second hat where I lead consulting. We have 5 different consulting groups for our Great Lakes region as well.
Got it. Sounds good. And Steve, I wanted to mention too, so my sister's actually an auditor, so I understand kind of that attention to detail and how important that is.
Awesome.
When it comes to, making sure all of your systems are working properly. But definitely, want to kick this off thinking about how RSM uses data analytics internally. You both have had a lot of different exposure to it, but sort of what are some of the main use cases you've seen for data analytics within RSM?
So, Maxim, at the highest level, there's two, I think, big categories, right? We have used data analytics to become more efficient at providing existing solutions that we provide today. We have also used data analytics to come up with some brand new solutions that we've never offered before for our customers. And then pure internally, right? Our use cases for data analytics really are not unlike any other professional services business. So, whether we're trying to figure out who's most likely to not pay an invoice and the later, we, from an efficiency standpoint, all three lines of business have baked data analytics techniques into their core methodologies or approaches for delivering services. You can imagine an international tax client who has multiple locations, multiple ERP systems. You got to get all that data out, cleaned up, make sure it's accurate, and get it into another tool to do your tax analytical work on it. And last but not least, we've developed some use cases where we've offered brand new services that we've never offered in the past. So, for instance, Steve's group has done a lot around proactive anti-fraud kind of identification, right, for our clients. We're doing a lot of work as a managed service now for clients, cleaning up their data, for instance, their CRM data, and keeping it clean over time, as well as enriching that data with more useful information that they can use to drive their business.
Right. Within the fintech vertical, anti-money laundering and AML is a big topic as well. And sort of the data analytics of being able to track these transactions ties into it deeply. Maybe could you go into a little bit more detail in terms of how RSM has used that for its risk and compliance?
Sure. I'll give you a couple of fintech examples specifically, and we'll start with AML. So for those of you not familiar, AML is anti-money laundering. And just like you watch on TV shows with the mobsters, they're trying to figure out how do they clean their money in here. And there are various regulations around what financial services organizations, or really anyone who's dealing with cash and cash equivalents, need to do with this. So there's some robust software packages that have been on the market for a while related to AML. However, from a compliance perspective, the bank still needs to prove that those technologies are working accurately. So a lot of what we'll do is we'll use analytics to actually try to complement those technologies, create rules that are very similar to those, and see what are we flagging that may not be flagged in those solutions, and then do some statistical analysis to figure out, why is that not being flagged? Is this the result of maybe a rule not being tuned correctly? So there are various parameters that the organization can input when they're using these technologies. But effectively, we're doing what's known in compliance as a model validation. We're effectively creating a very similar model using analytics to say, does our model come up with similar results? And if not, is it explainable why that happens? Another fintech example I think is pretty interesting when we get into fair lending. So in the US, we've got a lot of regulations around for financial institutions, making sure that if they're making lending decisions, they can't discriminate and approve loans to non-minority parties at different ratios than they would to minority parties, various ratios around that. And we'll use not only bank data for that, but sometimes in the regulatory space, there's also public data that a bank needs to contribute. So we'll map into peer data as well as census data as well. So we're pulling census tract data and really looking forward to the new census coming out so we get some refresh data in here. But we can effectively geospatially map how that bank's decision not only relates to their peers, but the census region and the groups as a whole, and allow them to do some what-if type analysis to see how can different changes in their processes change the way they compare against peers and the census tract itself.
That's interesting. Yeah, I definitely was pretty familiar with that first anti-money laundering use case, but that second example of actually how you can use data analytics to build more sort of financial inclusion and equity, that's pretty interesting as well.
Yep. And one additional point on that, Maxim, that I think is interesting as well. Sometimes we talk about predictive analytics in terms of predicting something magical, what customers do we need to do business with, or those types of things. But we also use predictive analytics to infer data that may not be in the data set itself. So going back to the fair lending side, if I'm doing a mortgage, I know what sex you are. That's actually part of the mortgage application. But if I'm issuing a loan for a car loan, that's not actually part of the application. but we'll use predictive algorithms combined with, again, both census data as well as data from ancestral sites and common names as of a person's age based on a zip code to actually predict the gender of someone to feed back into those algorithms as well.
Got it. Yeah. So it gets pretty, pretty comprehensive there. Is there any kind of specific learnings or great experiences kind of you've seen from doing that type of analytics?
Well, I think the big learning that Jim can attest to is, sometimes the quality of your analytic is based on how good your data is as well. And, no matter how large the organization, inevitably organizations tend to have a lot of poor quality data. So we're doing a lot of initiatives through Jim's team on helping organizations implement better data governance processes and get more control over really that source of the truth.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And no, I appreciate that. And I wanted to learn a little bit more, about how RSM uses data analytics with regards to your clients as well. I know that you work with a variety of different types of funds and maybe do modeling and analytics for those. Can you kind of go a little bit more into how that works out in your analytics?
Sure, Maxim. I don't know if you mean so much our internal client processes around how we actually work with our clients or external things we do for them. But from the fund or transaction standpoint, we do quite a bit of what we call deal analytics. So on the sell side or the buy side, if someone is selling a company or buying a company, we'll download the data of that target and really mine the data and try to identify unique things that we would not have gotten, right, from looking at audited financial statements. So we may find that this company you're about ready to buy, 90% of their revenue is coming from two customers. One of the customers is about ready to go out of business and the other one is the owner's uncle, right? You might want to discount what you're paying for that company as a result. If you're talking more internally, we're using data analytics internally across the entire client value cycle. Client intake, for instance, is a very important kind of process for us. We need to make sure that we're doing business with clients who are creditworthy, right? But we also have to make sure that we're not violating the independence rules associated with our accounting industry. We use data analytics oftentimes during project execution to try to flag projects that might be getting off track, right? And so that we can fix them before hopefully our clients experience any disruption. And then last but not least, I kind of mentioned a little bit, we're also using it around billing and collection. So making sure we're billing clients properly for the right amounts at the right time, and that we're collecting our fees as we should.
Got it. I think that's very critical. That's the portion of analytics that touches on essentially how smoothly your business is running. And, if you're taking on projects or new clients, is there ultimately going to be value for your company? And I think that's a space that a lot of different corporations are looking into right now. What type of returns have you seen internally when you kind of measure the impact of using these type of analytics?
I think every use case is different, but in some cases, we're seeing order of magnitude returns. And actually, one of our challenges as a professional services firm, Maxim, is how do we capture that value? And what I mean by that is, let's say we manually did a task that took us 200 hours, and we billed our client for that work, and now we've automated that task. Well, do we just charge our client 200 hours less for our fees? Or do we, somehow split that savings with them, and how do we bill for that? It's kind of an interesting challenge. Long term, right? Everyone is going to start to use data analytics as how they provide these solutions. So we're just going to have to do it to stay in the game and be competitive from a price perspective. But we've had anywhere from under 1x returns to 10x returns depending on the use case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like there may be some sort of new methodologies needed for how to calculate rather than just the number of hours people worked, maybe the technology that's being used. And, touching on sort of the team outside of kind of what you mentioned about those who, your new technologies that are more automated, there are a lot of different people who are involved in building this out internally, from data analysts to data scientists and data engineers. What does your sort of internal structure look like for analytics, and how do you kind of build out that team?
Yeah. So Jim already alluded to, we've got a lot of different teams that deal with data analytics within RSM. I think one of the things we've strived to do as an organization is, despite our size, actually set up some structures so we can be highly collaborative in the way we work. So Jim and I are part of a cross-functional team that includes people from various lines of business involved in analytics. We have regular calls talking about what's going on. And we're also looking forward to say, hey, is there something we all seem to be doing that might make more sense in a center of excellence as opposed to being piecemealed out throughout that? But I think, the other thing on the consulting side for sure is a lot of the skills that are required depend on the nature of the project. Sometimes we'll have a client that knows exactly what they want. I want this type of analysis done on this type of data, and I effectively want to direct people who just have the technical skills to be able to make that happen. But on the other end of the spectrum, we've got clients that either don't know what they want at all, or think they know what they want, but don't really know what's needed to make that happen. So I think a lot of what we need to do is look at the specific scenario. We do tend to have cross-functional teams in a lot of efforts. So I'll take the risk analytics that we do. We found early on that if we just took someone who knew technology, who knew how to write analytics, their challenge was, without the domain expertise, if they're doing a fraud analysis, for example, a common vendor fraud analysis, they might write an analytic that's producing results, but without that domain expertise, they couldn't necessarily look at the results and say, well, wait a minute, that looks a little bit weird, or I think this might be a false positive because of these types of things. So by blending those skills, either by finding those unicorns that happen to know both analytics and functional processes within that, or just having teams that combine those types of knowledge, I think that's helpful in there. Last thing I'll mention, data scientists. We certainly have data scientists on the team. I remember one of our good data scientists, we had him do some visualizations in a data viz tool and found out that, well, maybe his data science background doesn't work well for visualization. So a lot of it's just understanding what skills are needed and how do we bring a collaborative team together to be able to produce those skills. Jim, I see that resonated with you as well.
Yeah, that's a funny example because you're absolutely right, Steve. We found that, for instance, our data scientists, they want to do data science-oriented work, right? They don't want to do visualizations. They don't want to be doing ETL work, right? They really want to be doing advanced analytics with the tools they've been trained on. So, we still have work to do, but we are trying to get those folks solely focused on those types of opportunities. Part of the challenge, though, is the mid-market, right? I guess it was back in 2018, we had Nielsen do a big study of our mid-market CXO clients in terms of what they saw as being the biggest risks and opportunities. And they finally said, harvesting the power of our data as one of the biggest opportunities. I always jokingly tell people data analytics in the mid-market, it's sort of like fashion. It starts on the West Coast, goes to New York, then Chicago, and ends up in Dubuque, Iowa. And that's kind of what we've seen. And I think you're going to ask, I don't want to steal your thunder. I think you have some questions later on, but data analytics has definitely finally hit the mid-market strong and picked up very, very solidly. We've had tremendous growth across all of our practices.
Right. No, that's actually a great segue into kind of what I wanted to talk about next, which wasn't just sort of RSM's use of analytics, but kind of what you're seeing more broadly within the market for data analytics. You have both been in the space for a long time. How have you seen kind of enterprises change their adoption of different business analytics tools?
Yeah, I think it's been radically different, Steve, and I'll certainly jump over to you to share your insights over the past 2 years. Now, don't get me wrong, our upmarket clients have been using a lot of these techniques for a long period of time, but our core middle market clients, I mean, to be honest, they couldn't afford oftentimes, right, to do a lot with their data. And now, right, with, kind of the democratization of data analytics, both in visualization tools as well as data wrangling and all those aspects, they have a much better opportunity, right, to really kind of look at that and explore and hopefully, if they're nimble, use that data to, jump or leapfrog some of their more traditional competitors. So I definitely feel like in the mid-market, it is definitely penetrating in a very big way over the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good to see because I think you're going to be seeing a lot more efficient business processes, and perhaps those companies that aren't as quick to adopt it might kind of not really know where they stand in terms of their own processes because they don't have the analytics to really be able to gauge these and may fall behind a bit. What are your thoughts on sort of how artificial intelligence ties in with analytics and perhaps these no code or low code environments that are now being used to sort of develop more analytics for maybe the middle market?
Yeah, it's kind of what I referred to, Maxim, this, democratization of data analytics. I mean, it used to be, 7 or 8 years ago, Steve, if you wanted a report, right, you would call the service desk and create a ticket, and you would wait 3 or 4 weeks, right, for IT to come back with your report. Generally, it'd be wrong, right? So you'd have multiple iterations to finally get it right. And then you'd have your report, right? Our tools now, the visualization tools, we're very, very focused on Power BI. We do a fair amount of Tableau and also some ClickView. Those tools, if you're a business savvy user and have an interest in doing a few things that are maybe a little more technical than Excel, right? You can create those reports on your own. And now we're seeing with other tools like Alteryx, even a democratization of the next layer of data analytics solution. So we used to have people spending tons of time, downloading data from different systems and comma delimited files in Excel, right? And trying to clean it up. Some of the tools though now allow our users to even do a lot of that cleanup.
Mm-hmm. I see. Do you see any potential challenges though, perhaps with folks who don't have that same sort of like engineering understanding of really being able to visualize processes and understand how they work, maybe if they don't have a technical background using some of these tools?
Absolutely. That's why my phone rings at 3 o'clock in the morning. What happens is, and actually it's kind of funny, Steve, we kind of work this out between us, even at RSM, right? I don't view data analytics as something that our data analytics team exclusively does. It is a tool. Like when the PC came out, we didn't say, okay, anybody who wants to use a PC, our infrastructure practice has to be involved with that, right? So we have folks doing data analytics or using data analytics techniques all over the firm. But what we do try to do, if we're going to build something that becomes a permanent part of our client's technology footprint, we get the architects involved to make sure that it's scalable, right? That it's not going to shut down. Otherwise we tend to, quite frankly, get those calls at our call center late at night because something's broken.
Yeah, and I think, Jim, you hit on there's a sustainability factor that goes beyond just the, what happens if things go down. I mentioned, Maxim, that I had some computer science background as well, which I really enjoyed. And there's this thinking you learn how to create repeatable code, right? And if you're handing off these tools to someone who, maybe in a functional area and they have all the best intent, but they've not really thought through how do I reuse this in the future as thresholds change, as the nature of the business I want to look at change. How do I redo this without having to rewrite code? Sometimes what you'll see is what they put together was a great point solution, but not something that's very scalable as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, definitely.
One last thing, Maxim, on that. I think it's really important for business users who do tackle this themselves, right? To make sure that they're really putting controls in place to ensure that what their output is, that it's actually accurate based on the input data. Sometimes these tools automate so much, right? If you're not careful, you might not realize what you're recommending and really understanding, is it truly accurate based on the data that you were given? Got
it. And there's, a couple of other questions that I had that sort of relate to some of the startup presentations we actually have later. But, have you seen any issues with data privacy access as perceptions around data evolve with things like GDPR, CCPA, maybe your data that you're taking from other companies or customers?
Yeah.
Kind of, how do you overcome those challenges?
Yeah, on the compliance side, it's definitely become a big issue. I come from an internal audit background where internal auditors by charter have rights to view all company data. But even with that, we're seeing on the internal audit profession recognition that some of the data we have access to is highly, highly sensitive. And I think, 20 years ago, we used to be able to say, hey, just give me your employee master file. I'm going to bump it up against vendors. But these days we have to think about encryption, not only of the data in transit, but also at rest in here. We're looking at, when we get into various regulations in different countries, not just GDPR, but sometimes we have to be sensitive to where that data is being processed and look at, can we spin up an Azure server in that country so that data is actually not having to move. We are seeing with some of the technologies, we're working with some big banks right now, the advantage of some of these tools to actually do the processing on that system itself within the organization without having to transfer the data outside of the organization to do some of the crunching. So some of the capabilities of those tools have made us be able to do processing on the organization systems themselves with our own tools, which has been nice. But I think the whole area of privacy has really made data analysis a lot more complex, particularly when dealing with international organizations.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And, sort of one final question I had, touching on the startups that we have as well. So, our platform at Plug and Play can help connect startups with corporations like RSM. But, from your experience in general, like how should startups approach working with an organization like RSM? Maybe first getting in touch with you, and then kind of what's the process if maybe they have new technology in this space that could be useful for RSM?
Well, obviously they can get in touch with us through you guys, right? We're a big sponsor of everything that you do. We've gotten tremendous value from that, and always will have a willing audience to look at what these startups do. But also, I think it's just really, it's actually, I'll be honest, it's a little hard, right? We have, I don't know, what is it, Steve, 900 partners, and in some ways it's like 900 CEOs. So you kind of got to get started in the right place. But certainly if anybody has any questions specifically around data analytics solutions, they could start with Steve or I, and we can get them to the right group within the company. Our offerings, right, are all about creating value for clients. So any tool, right, that we find can help us do that and, bring value to our clients, we're certainly going to be interested in.
Got it. Appreciate that. And, just had one kind of question that came in from the audience. What advice would you have for, large enterprise that's seeking a more data-driven approach? I think
that's a great question.
How they could sort of start to implement and kind of start on that journey.
Yeah. No, I think one of the best places to start, I mean, it's like anything else. You got to think, am I going to go top up or bottom up or top down? You see a lot of our clients enter into the space by really trying to identify what are the key performance indicators of their business and creating, an executive level or a leader level dashboard that allows folks to know in near real time how different aspects of the business are doing. So, not just financial measures, right? Obviously, everybody has financial measures and knows what their revenue is for the month versus last year, all those sorts of things. But even operational measures. So, what kind of defects am I getting on my assembly line? How quickly am I turning inventory over, et cetera? That's a great place to start with those KPIs because it could have the biggest impact on the business. The other thing we've seen is just folks actually creating data analytics centers of excellence. In fact, within RSM, we've created several innovation groups, and we have a lot of contests and games for them. So we've had bot wars, we've had advanced analytic contests where teams kind of just organize and build a solution that they think will help RSM or our customers, and then compete for different prizes or awards based on how effective the committee feels that they are.
Got it.
Steve, do you have anything to add to that one?
Gamifying it a little bit, yeah. And
we have,
just want to mention we do have a couple of startup presentations that I want to get to, but let me know kind of what are your kind of last thoughts? Anything you kind of want to leave the audience with here?
Steve, do you want to go first or?
Yeah, I just echo something you said. I think for organizations getting started, the biggest thing is to find that momentum, and what that really entails. Pick a topic that's going to get someone in senior management excited, because once you get someone in senior leadership excited about something, all the funding and all the other issues kind of go away in there. But tied into that, that also means pick something that's going to get someone excited that you're not climbing Mount Everest to get to. Take something that you think you can do in a reasonable amount of time with the resources you've got, tackle that right away, and kind of move at it that way. What's going to get leadership interested in what you've been doing? Jim, your thoughts?
No, I think that's great. I think I would describe that as pick a realistic problem statement, right? Pick something that is a significant pain to your company or your business, but also something that you can solve fairly quickly. I think momentum is critical, like any other kind of IT or transformation initiative. showing early success and getting some momentum really makes things easier.
Got it. Yeah. Maybe starting small, perhaps kind of getting a first win and then building that momentum from there to be able to take on those bigger projects. Appreciate that. Well, great having you. Thanks, Steve and Jim. I really appreciate your insight. It's always good to hear from our partners, especially one as active as RSM. So thanks. I think, we've gotten a lot from the corporate side, and then stick around. We're going to launch into some startup presentations on how they're innovating now in the data analytics space. Thanks again, Steve and Jim.
Thanks, Max.